your flesh and blood.
Welcome to Tell Me Your Story. New paradigms for a new world where we're giving you choices and knowledge of those choices to help make your dreams come true. We are here 9 times a week. Sundays at 7 a.m. and 7 p.m., Monday mornings at 1 a.m., Wednesdays at 9 a.m., and Monday through Friday from 8 to 9 a.m., streaming live at all those times at richarddugan.com. We are on SoundCloud, iTunes, TuneIn Radio, Spotify, Stitcher, Player FM, as well as YouTube, where you can watch these conversations. I hope that you will take time to subscribe and click notifications so that when a new conversation is posted, you'll be notified and you'll be able to tune in, listen in, and learn, and be entertained and inspired. A reminder that Choices, which is my book, 5 Steps for Life, it's available on Amazon.com in paperback, hardcover, and Kindle with Audible, soon to be released. We also ask that if you can support the work that we are doing financially, we do have a PayPal account. It is there for your security as well as ours. And when they ask for an email address to whom you're sending, please go to richard@richarddugan.com. That's the email address. If you go to richarddugan.com, there is also a link directly to PayPal so that you can send us whatever support you can. And we thank you to those who have helped and to those who will help. We also ask that you take time during this decade of perfect vision, the 2020s, to go within to that quiet, peaceful, calm, still place and listen to that still, small voice. And with that, we now take you to our very special interview and guest here on Tell Me Your Story. And welcome to Tell Me Your Story. I am Richard Dugan, and we have with us a very special guest who's going to talk to us not only about being authentic, that is truly important in our lives as we move forward, but also in creating alliances, basically empowering sustainable change in complex organizations. And we're going to talk today with the author of this book, Crystal Gibbons. And Gibson, I beg your pardon. Crystal Gibson, thank you so much for joining us all the way on the East Coast.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Glad to be here.
It's really nice to have you here to talk about this because obviously we're all watching. We're watching what's going on over there on the East Coast. We won't get in too deep into that, but a lot of changes going on. There's no question about that.
Yeah.
And I mean, and it's a big organization. There's no question. I mean, that's what we can call it. It's a big organization.
Right. Lots of complexities.
Yeah, I don't think I would call it a business. It's not. It's government, and businesses are different than governments. But by the same token, we hope and pray that it'll be around for another 100, 150, 200 years.
It definitely will. Yes.
Follow the guidelines of our founding fathers. Then hopefully it will be. But a lot of what's going on, I can't disagree with a company, let alone this kind of an organization.
Mm-hmm.
From the fact, I absolutely understand that. I do that in my own life, in my own personal financial situation, as well as in other areas.
Right. And you've got to use the information that comes to you to make adjustments as well, right? So, I mean, we are not stagnant. Everything evolves. So organizations are just like humans, and you have to evolve based on the feedback that you get from, the people in the company, organization, or otherwise. So, I mean, I agree with the approach of making adjustments and being agile with the feedback that you actually get back from the world. However, you got to pay attention to what's working. You got to hold on to what actually is working and what made the organization successful in the first place. And so it's a fine balance between finding out how do you hold on to the things that were working, and then how do you transcend from that and kind of amplify those things as well as replacing the things that were not working.
I read a book. It was made mandatory by one of my station managers years ago, back in the 80s, actually. I read a book called Who Moved the Cheese?
Oh, I love that. Yes.
And I wasn't real happy being forced into reading it, not because I knew nothing about it. So it wasn't like I was coming from a place of knowledge about it.
Yeah.
I read it. And then I went back to my boss's office and I put the book on his desk and I said, okay, I read it. And I only have one thing to say about it. I don't care if they move the cheese. Just tell me where. No. Because we know that the only constant in the universe is change. I mean, it
Absolutely.
happens. The moon isn't in the same place. Asteroids are flying everywhere, and this is on the macrocosmic level.
Hmm.
On the microcosmic level, all of our cells in the subatomic particles are all in constant motion, and we have a new. They say that we have a brand new body every 7 years. It's a gradual
Hmm.
process, but a lot of times it's funny how people don't want their families to change. They don't want their businesses. As a matter of fact, some people even want to go back to the way it used to be whenever it is that they want to go back to. And
Yeah.
I got it right. It's the end of the world as you know it. And every minute of every day, it's the end of the world as you knew it. It doesn't exist anymore. And so let's talk a little bit about that from the standpoint that the universe and Mother Nature, even if you want to keep it on a global level, on a earth plane, so to speak, is
Hmm.
constant change. And yet we refuse to learn that lesson from Mother Nature, who I believe is our greatest teacher.
Well, one thing my favorite phrase from that book that you mentioned, Who Moved the Cheese, is what would you do if you were not afraid? And I love that because I think a lot of the things that people are holding on to or just refusing to change is because they're afraid of the unknown. And so, I just challenge that because if we just understand that we don't know what's good or bad, so there's really nothing to fear. We have to kind of make the change and then see what's on the other side. I think that there's endless possibilities if we kind of push the fear over to the side or just figure out a way to kind of get beyond the fear of it all. Because I think a lot of people just are afraid of that's a big barrier for a change is just the fear of not knowing what will happen next.
It's been said that that 90%, maybe a little more than that, of what we fear never happens.
It's
It
in your head, right?
and then there are those who talk about this particular period in time, this period of uncertainty. What do you mean this period? You mean this period called human history? Because there has never been a certain time.
Yes.
And I use the analogy of a pond. If a pond is static, using a computer term versus dynamic,
Hmm.
you get algae and all kinds of stuff growing on top, and then it starts to stink, and then you get mosquitoes and all of this other stuff that comes along. But
Hmm.
you've got a lake or a river that's flowing, that's constantly moving. None of that happens.
Yeah.
Now, there certainly are, you know, purposes for a stagnant pond from time to time, sure. But life isn't that way. Life is not stagnant. I mean, my God, I'm almost 65 years old. I don't feel it. I still think I'm 17, but my body reminds me that I'm not.
Right. Those random aches tell
Exactly.
you.
I I like um I like what I do. I like where I live. I like who I live with.
Hmm.
I love the animals that we're with, the relationship that I'm in, and on and on and on. And one of my biggest challenges, especially in a relationship, and we can tie this into business relationships as well, talking about
Hmm.
your book about authentic alliance, is that relationships change. I mean, I even look at my mother and father. For the last, I don't know, maybe 5 or longer years, my father, he began to deteriorate. What really brought him down was the death of his eldest daughter, my eldest sister, a year before his passing. And he told my mom, I don't want to live anymore. I don't want to be here. And I understood that. Of course, I didn't respond to that because he said to me when we were there for my sister's memorial, and says, "Parents aren't supposed to bury their kids."
Right.
And my mother told me the story of the conversation with my father about that. And she says, knowing how healthy he was, so okay, but what are you going to die of? You know. And of course, a year later, March 1st of 2023, he passed on.
Mm.
And I'm glad he's free of the body that was diagnosed with all kinds of other stuff 5 days before his passing.
Hmm.
I can't even imagine my father in that body. I know he would definitely he would want out.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's changed, and I know I'm going to get the call from one of my sisters saying mom has passed away. I know,
Hmm.
but she's healthy right now. Every time I call her, the voice is strong, and she's there, and she's inspiring and uplifting and encouraging, and being mom, but being a friend too.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about those dynamics within. Let's go ahead and bring it into a company or an organization that is having difficulty moving forward and moving upward. Climbing that hill. We'll call it the hill of success. I don't like success and failure, but wanting to be more than they were yesterday, today, and wanting to be more tomorrow than they are today. Not that where they are today is a bad place.
Yeah, I think it ties into mindset. So when you think about what people are saying and the language that they're using in companies, it's just very similar to like an individual. So I always think that, your words are a weapon. So, the things that you say are probably going to happen because you put it out into the universe. Same thing with organizations. So I feel like, in my experience, the hardest organizations to get to change are the successful ones, because it's very hard to tell the successful company that you need to do things different when they've noticed or felt success for a very long time. Um, and so it's really a challenge to get the language into the organization as far as like continuous improvement. You did good here, but how can we amplify that? Like, how can we take it to the next level? So a lot of it is really driving what they talk about, and then also getting really into being able to figure out what groups of people need to work together in order to like create that community of practice and be able to be that catalyst for change in the organization, because sometimes it takes just like that group of people who feel strongly about something to be able to pollinate across large organizations. Sometimes it just takes like for instance, if you I hate to look at organizations like they're a family, but if you think of it like family dynamics, sometimes you need to get like a cousin and a sister and like a brother together to convince the rest of the family that we need to go ahead and take this trip. Right. So it's the same in organizations. You might need to get somebody from product engineering, quality, and this group of people are really passionate about us doing this, taking on this change initiative, and then their enthusiasm and their communication and the way that they work will be seen by the rest of the organization, and then it's amplified, right? So then if you get on board with them, you're looked at as a trusted ally because you are within that group. So I really believe that there's a strength in numbers. There's a strength in, being able to catalyze change when you kind of get together with like-minded people who are speaking the same language that you believe in or that are aligned to your values.
Let's take just a quick look here. And I think that we would both agree that what's going on the national governmental level, what is being done, or the reason that it's being done, we would agree, yeah, cutting away the fat.
Makes sense, yeah.
In time, uh, oh, come on, what's the phrase I'm thinking of here? That the way that things are done seem counter to what you and I might consider to be respectful, considerate, and so on and so forth. It's almost depersonalized, to where I think a scalpel should be used and not a chainsaw. Uh,
Yeah.
this applies to any corporation, a company, or family. When you're taking a look at a budget and saying, hey, look, we got a lot of fat, we need to cut it away. But at the same time, you're also dealing with other human beings. Uh,
Right.
I'm not asking you to comment on what is going on the East Coast there, but let's broaden it. And in a general sense,
Yeah.
you say that this needs to be done, but there's got to be a better way.
I feel like if I think about like the transformation work that I've done across
Mhm.
maybe 20 plus years, oh gosh. So um, the command and control approach has, worked for certain emergency situations. So if we think about like when COVID happened, somebody needed to take charge. Someone needed to be command and control. We needed somebody to follow, right? So it had to be that way. But when you get into when we're not in emergency mode and we are looking to transcend to just a higher level of consciousness, we're not going to be able to do that if we're not co-creating and making this a group effort or making us feel like we are all doing this together. What it does is we still have that command and control consciousness. So what that does is, everyone does the right things when someone's looking, but when you turn your back or when someone else is in charge, you're not doing it anymore because there was nothing that really like connected you to that approach, right? So the sustainability of it all is what I question. Is, once you take away the people watching, who is really going to hold this up? Who feels like this is something that is that we could value? It's a difference of either this is just what I was told, someone else's law is saying that I have to do this, as opposed to this is how we do it and this is the best way to do it and this is how we know all together that that's the best way forward. And I think that's how organizations work as well. So it's no different. When you have that command and control leader, it works for a little bit. I've seen it. If you have like maybe a consultant company come in, and I've seen it a plenty of times, they tell you, hey, you need to have a certain number of employees here, so let's lay off everybody so that we could get to this, optimum number.
Mhm.
Yes, that command and control, that outside, that ripping everything apart, you'll see change. You have to see change, but how are the people who are left behind? How is that environment going to be, and how are we going to nurture those people's consciousness?
I know that in a lot of instances, and this has been true, over the years, because I've experienced it in the stations that I've worked for, the companies I've worked for.
Mm-hmm.
Start letting people go, the tasks that they were doing still needed to be done. Well, who gets to do them? The people that are left. So, in addition to what they were doing, now they have to take on all this other stuff. Do they get compensated? Not usually, no. And I think that's the frustration that's going to be experienced by a lot of people.
Absolutely.
And
And then also when you think about humanity, that has a domino effect. So it's not just the people at work. They take that feeling home. So then we're thinking about the different generations that they're impacting. They're impacting people have their parents at home, their kids at home, their spouses. They're bringing that energy home with them. So it's spreading around and it has a long lasting effect to just the overall nature of everyone and how we interact with each other.
there's a term that's used for a lot of folks, and it's being used with you as well, called a change leader. That's really what, because change again is the constant of the universe.
Yeah.
And so you have learned and now share with people how to what's the right word to, because I want to say cope with or manage, uh, and and and
To
and
navigate it. Yeah.
what is sustainable transformation when it comes to change? What does that mean?
It means, like I said before, when no one's watching, is are we still doing it this way? So when the third party company leaves, are we still doing this way? Because we all feel like this is the right way to do it. So it's really about putting it in the organization's DNA so that it is just the way that you work. And so in order for it to be the way that you work, everyone in the company or everyone in the organization has to feel like this is the right way to do things. It can't just be someone from the outside saying, this is the best practice. We're going to do this. Yeah, we'll do it for a little bit, but when you leave, we're not doing that anymore.
We're talking with Crystal Gibson, and we're talking about the work that has been doing for a couple of decades here, and now it's in a book. It's called Authentic Alliance: Empowering Sustainable Change in Complex Organizations. As we continue here on Tell Me Your Story, I'm Richard Dugan, and Crystal, I'm fascinated by this subject because obviously, I'm dealing with change almost on a daily basis, but I'm aware that that's the reality. I know that there's always change. I
Mm-hmm.
don't always accept it, with grace, and comportment, but I know it's there, and I know that that's the one thing that kind of keeps me moving forward is that I know change is coming, and if
Mm-hmm.
it's something that my personality is not real happy with, whatever it might be, that I know change is coming and that there may be something that'll come along that I'll feel pretty good about.
Yeah.
And you mentioned something real interesting about an we'll refer to it as an outside consultant who comes to
Yeah.
your company, your business, your organization, and they've been brought in. And I will tell you, I think of Gordon Ramsay and the Kitchen Nightmare series. And they
Yeah.
called him to come in and fix whatever the problem was that they were having. Okay. They
Mm-hmm.
He didn't call them. And then they give him grief about what he's telling them many of the problems are with their restaurant.
Mm-hmm.
Find that happens in business because the company has been doing it that way for who knows how long.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
They want a solution within the framework that they have created.
Right. Or sometimes there's companies that will come in and sell you the dream. They'll sell it to you and say in 6 months you're gonna make this happen, and then they'll come in, give you this, do an observation, give you this strategy, and say, here, go ahead and do it. You know, and so the difference between what I do and what other consultant companies do is I come in and we actually are working together with it. And I think that's a little bit of the resistance that I see in companies is that when they're given the strategy, they're expecting someone to actually help them and work through the trenches with them on it. And when they find out what is actually involved in changing things, so like, for example, if you want to deliver things faster, hey, you have to empower your people who you gave those title to actually do their job, right? That's a mindset approach. That's something that if you are always used to telling people what they're going to do and how they're going to do it and what's the priority, you have to change the way that you show up to your team and allow them to be empowered to make those decisions, and kind of figure out what your role is. So a lot of people aren't used to just they're used to understanding what the dream is and what they were sold, but when we get into the actual weeds of what is involved, there's resistance because it's natural.
Hmm. Talk to us about the charm framework. What is that?
Yeah, the charm framework comes from a when companies ask me to come in and tell me about my teams, come in and tell me how my teams are doing, give me the maturity level of my teams. And so it's a framework I put together to help actually have a systematic approach to doing that. So, like we talked about before, it's really based on co-creating and not just going in and giving people a survey and then, they don't know what happened to the survey. So we co-create the assessments together with the teams and we really understand what's most important. And so CHARM actually stands for, it's an acronym. So it stands for co-creating, honoring the organization's events. So if the organization has like some regular release times, or if they have surveys that they send out on a regular basis, you honor that. You don't just jump into that. And then A is for assess. So I've been in a lot of situations where groups will take months to figure out what this assessment looks like and don't execute it. So I wanted to be clear, like execute the assessment and really only ask the questions that matter to the organization, to the leadership of what we're trying to find out. We don't want to have like just a laundry list of questions. We want to be really, really succinct on what we're assessing groups on. And then after that, we have to find the narrative of what the feedback that the groups gave you. So you want to do a retrospective and have conversations about, okay, this is what came back in the feedback. Can you tell me a little bit more about that? And from those conversations, you create a backlog of change. So you don't just say, okay, thanks for your feedback. We'll, follow up with you later. You actually take that list of changes that come from the retrospectives and have a backlog and action plan so that you can implement it and show people action that you actually are doing something from the information that they gave you. And then you measure, M is measure. So you just measure the progress and you adjust accordingly based on what's happening. So that's the CHARM framework.
We'll talk more about that as we continue talking with Crystal Gibson, and we're talking about her latest work that, as of this conversation, will be available March 25th. We hope you'll get a copy of it at Amazon as well as we continue here on Tell Me Your Story. I'm Richard Dugan, and this is a fascinating conversation because it ties into not just a company or an organization, or for that matter, even a governmental body on any level, but also on an individual level, family as well as individual. I know that here we are, and your book will be out right after the spring equinox, if you will, and everybody's going to be thinking about spring cleaning on all different kinds of levels. And I'm already formulating in my head, okay, here at the radio station, we have one room, control room. There's not a whole lot to clean in here, but we have a storage room just down the hall. Mm-hmm. And I need to go through everything, and I need to separate things out. Okay, I'm going to put a box over here. This will be all the wires, and then here will be all the little components, and here are the big pieces of equipment over here, and so on and so forth, and trying to organize this storage room to make more room. I personally refer to myself as the great consolidator because when I pack boxes, 9 times out of 10, there is no air in that box. Okay.
Yeah.
But you can't spring clean in that same fashion when you're dealing with people. Talk about, and the term here is used inner GPS. I would rephrase that as the still small voice, if you will. How important, and it seems like it is pretty vital, is it to spend some time, even if it takes 5 or 10 minutes away from completing a particular task that needs to be done, like the spring cleaning, like separating stuff out and so forth, to then put some of this stuff out? How important is that in that process?
It's very important. I mean, I take 20 minutes a day to meditate just to get centered. And I've been doing that for years now. And what I've learned is it helps you really understand what is important and what boundaries you want to put around yourself. So, I mean, you otherwise you just will say yes to everything or say no to things that truly do matter, and you'll miss, opportunities. So if we think about spring cleaning, if you take a minute and really figure out why is it important for you to have this clear space, then it helps you make the decision on what stays and what goes. So same thing with career and being in an organization. If you don't really know who you are and what's important to you, you really you might be unhappy in your current situation and not know why. And the reason why is because you haven't taken that moment to really figure out what really matters to you. And so organizations are just like individuals. I mean, there's a lot of different variables, and you have to, really discern between what is important to the organization compared to what is important to you, because you will last longer than that. Or, I mean, you will be with yourself probably longer than you're going to be in that organization, right? So the top priority is you and what you personally want to get out of that experience.
We, I've trained, I've hired and trained people at different stations. I had that authority to do, and I would train people. And this was my philosophy. I'm going to show you how I carry out this respective task, and I'm going to show you and tell you the result that we, the station, want. All right. And I'll go through the training process, and it might take a few days. And then I say, and now I'm going to turn you loose because it looks like you've got it. And I want you to know that you do not have to do it the way I have been doing it. However, you do need to achieve the result that we are asking for. So if you want to stand on your head, barefoot, okay, and drinking a soda, I don't care, as long as you get the result that we want.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Now, I haven't trained too many people in the last 20, 30 years. I beg your pardon. I beg your pardon. The last 15 or 20 years, maybe longer than that. But it seems to me that that seems to go along with what you are talking about, that there is a task that needs to be done, but just because I do it this way, and I'll tell you what really reinforced that for me. There's another book that I read back in 1990. I found it on Audible last October, and I read it again, and I recommend it to everybody because the message that I get from it is just because it ties into what you said earlier, just because
Mm-hmm.
we've always done it this way, does that mean that we always have to do it that way? And the title of the book, which you probably have read or at least know about, is called The Goal, Goal. And it's by an Israeli author by the name of Goldrat.
Oh no, I've never heard of that one. I gotta look that up.
Unfortunately, I would love to have him on the program.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, it's and the beautiful thing about it, it's not just a read. It's not Audible where they just read the book. It's a dramatization. It's like radio theater. Oh, it's great. Loved
Oh.
it. Hated it for it to come to an end because I got so comfortable and familiar with the characters. It was great. But
Yeah, you're right. It ties right into it, because even when I think about leaders and their teams and the innovation that we try to put into organizations, we want them to focus on outcome, not output. Because if you focus on outcome, you open up the opportunity for innovation. Like, all these new things are happening in the world. We've got AI, we've got all these things. If you just tell them, I want this button exactly this way, and you don't tell them the human behavior that you want the customer to feel, or what is the change, the outcome, then they're just going to make that button. But if you leave it open, the possibilities are endless of how many different ways, or better ways, that they could figure out how to have that particular outcome. So it's exactly the same.
well, I'll tell you. It also reminds me of that holiday story that you hear every so often around Thanksgiving, or even here Easter on this side of the so to speak, the international date line called New Year's. where you have the story of grandma who bakes this ham, in the oven. And of course, she grabs the pan that she's always used for the ham, and she
Hmm.
ends, and she puts it in the pan, and she puts it in the oven. And the kid, who's been watching for 3, 4, 5 years, asks Grandma, I'm curious, why do you always cut the ends of the ham off? I mean, it seems like such a waste. Now, she doesn't throw it away; she does use it, but anyway. And Grandma says, "Well, that's the way we've always done it." I said, "Well, but why?" This was, well, I cut the ends off because otherwise it wouldn't fit in the pan, rather than getting a bigger pan or
Hmm.
buying a smaller ham.
A lot of different possibilities.
Exactly. So it's really fascinating to me how all of this works. Crystal Gibson is my guest, and we're talking about the work that she is doing through a book that she has just released. That's being released, I should say. It's called Authentic Alliance: Empowering Sustainable Change in Complex Organizations. And you are listening to Tell Me Your Story. I'm Richard Dugan, along with Crystal Gibson. And Crystal, let's talk a little bit about your background and how it is that you find yourself now promoting and sharing not only the book that we're talking about, Authentic Alliance, but this wonderful framework that you talked about earlier called Charm, the Charm framework. How did all this begin for you? What drove you in this direction?
Yeah, so I've been in agile coach roles in enterprises for about 20 years. So I've been in different industries, from human capital management to technology to finance, and I've went all across the different levels of organizations as well. So I've been in customer service, relationship management, implementation, all those different places. So I got to the point at the beginning of last year where I wanted to start my own practice because I was working with a coach. And so I'm a very coached coach. I was working with the coach, and she, asked me to take a moment and think about my origin story of why would I want to start my own practice, and just really taking a step back and looking at like my whole career in a holistic way made me feel like, wow, if when I started at the beginning of this, it would be great if I had someone tell me this information now. Like, a lot of things I could have, avoided, skipped, just knew that, me feeling like a alien in the corporate workplace when I first got into corporate wasn't a weird thing. It was something that a lot of people share. Just having someone kind of tell me that when I first started would have helped me a lot. So that's what I'm really doing, is really putting that into a book, taking a moment and putting that there for someone who is in getting into a corporate space and they don't feel like they fit in instantly, or they need help kind of navigating and making an impact. They feel like they're in this large space and they're not really understanding how to become that trusted advisor or be that person who people go to. So that's really my why, or the reason why I did it, is to really give someone like a practical guide, one that I would have wanted when I first started.
Mhm.
And then also to be able to have something to level set. So when I have people who come to me for my practice who are in organizations, and organizations, sometimes they have so much like political stuff going on, or they have these expectations, high expectations for people who just got certifications and they don't have like any practical experience on things. So I'm like, there's secret weapon behind the scenes of coaching them and kind of letting people use me as, their secret weapon, use my experience, use everything that, I could tell you about a particular situation that came up. And the book kind of level sets that information for a lot of people too. So we could jump right into coaching, and I could kind of help you with role playing or anything like that. And then also, there's organizations, like I said earlier, where you've had a big, consulting company come in and just give you a strategy, but no one's really there to hold your hand and go through the trenches. So it's really I've seen that happen to too many companies. I've seen them waste a lot of money on things like that and consider it as a failure. So I really want to come into companies and let them, show them that this is possible. It's just you have to get into the weeds and really take a look at the organization and the way that people are thinking and the way that people are aligning together in order to make it sustainable and fit your company's situation.
Mm.
So those are my whys of why I decided to do that.
The cover of the book I find interesting because lower half of the book, the cover, I should say, appears to be a map with one of those pins that's been put in it. And we're talking about the maps, let's say the Google map or whatever map you use online on your phone or computer, what have you. What can you share with us, or was that the publisher's decision, or did
No, that was my idea. Yeah, because I wanted to, that indicator right there says you are here. And so I wanted to say you are here. You know what I mean? And so that feeds into, being able to, you'll see the map in the background. So it's a terrain that kind of looks like it's never ending. And that's the journey that a lot of people are on when they get into organizations, is that you are here. Your evolution will be a journey that lasts for a long time. And so I'm here to kind of help you understand who you are stepping into this journey and how to, be impactful when you do so.
it's interesting how I know that it's not as required these days when you're looking at these online maps, but I do remember the ones you got from the gas station unfolded, or you get a what the heck do they call those? They're the books that you buy. Atlas. You buy an atlas, a particular area of the country, or the whole country, or the globe, and then it's broken down into pages, different areas.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a legend that goes along with it that describes the various symbols that are used. And it seems to me that in your case, since this is more symbolic and or metaphorical, it's the charm framework that would be that legend for your map, isn't it?
Absolutely. And I got the charm name from my meditation practice, because I practice transcendental meditation. And they always say that when you come back to the mantra, it feels charming. So I held on to it feels charming when you have some sort of guide or legend like that. So that's where charm came from.
I like that. I think that's very cool. I think it's very cool. And again, this whole aspect of spending time, in your case, specifically meditating. I tend not to meditate, at least not in the traditional sense. I've done some research and reading in terms of the work that I do. Sometimes it's not so much here. I'm not meditating, but it's in the production. It's in the post production. It's in the editing. It's in though different solo activities that I do.
Mm-hmm.
Just the things that I produce, and it feels good. I mean, it just and there are times when certain things will come to my head. I am not one to take notes. I because I'm a person who learns by doing. I don't need notes if I'm doing it and I get it. And so the repetition kind of hammers it home. But I was on the phone with my boss the other day, and he was sharing with me some things that we needed to take care of.
Mm-hmm.
And I was actually taking notes. I mean, I had a pen in hand and a pad, and I was writing down little things that, that needed to be handled. When we were done with the meeting, I said, "Oh, and by the way, you'll be real proud of me. I've been taking notes this whole time." He says, "Really? Well, I am. I'm very proud of you." But it was helpful because it also showed me. And that's one of those areas that we were just talking about a little bit ago, where, yeah, I've always done it this way. I've always just kind of let it go into the brain and then and all that. And there was just something that was telling me, maybe my still small voice, my friend,
Hmm.
no, why don't you go ahead? I mean, it's not going to hurt anything. It's not,
It's an experiment.
could help. And
Yeah.
I did. And I've been doing that with other challenges. I have a challenge I'm dealing with one of our utility companies and so forth. And so I'm on the phone with them. What was your name again? Okay, and I jot that down. And if there's a phone number I called, I jot that down and then put the date up in the corner. So I've got that because I know that somewhere down the road somebody's going to ask me in this process. So who did you talk to and when? All right,
Hmm.
got it. And I have a good memory, but those notes are a whole, I don't have to remember them because there they are on paper, you know.
Right. Could
I,
free your space up for other more important things. Yeah.
I've heard that a technique like that can also free up your mind from stuff that may actually be troubling you. If you write it down, I have this hardcover blank pages book, uh,
Hmm.
half by 11. And I wrote down like 13 or 14 different things that I'd been thinking about. And I can't remember if I've thought about them. I have to go back to list to find out about those recently. Or have I accomplished that task that's done and I can cross it off
Hmm.
and so forth. That is something that can also help us to sort of spring clean like up here and here, isn't it?
Absolutely. It's like visualization. It's a power in actually just seeing it in front of you.
Mhm.
Um, Also, one thing that I have people do is, create a backlog and have a column that says you're in progress and done. Oh, it's so powerful when people move, just see the motion of things moving across and feeling like it's done. You feel like you made progress. So yeah, it's definitely a power in just the visualization of everything.
What about giving oneself credit for even accomplishing the small tasks, the tiny little things? Because my philosophy has always been, and I've shared this with people I've worked with, the details will make you or break you. But when you deal with the details and you finish them and you can cross it out or check it off, take credit for that, even no matter how small it is, because those add up, don't they? They build up and they give you
Momentum, yes.
is
And
that
also, I mean, I've looked at taking credit for some things sometimes as, if I'm telling it to somebody else, it's a gift, you're giving to them. They don't have to wonder what are you doing or what have you accomplished. You're telling them. So it kind of I see it as a gift.
about territorialism? I mean, when you go into a company, and again, they're a little bit on the resistant side because hey, look, this is our workplace, and this is the way we've always done it. Da, 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 da. I gave up territorialism 35, 40 years ago. I wanted to share everything that I knew about what I do with
Yeah.
so that if I was ever to leave, they could take over and do this so that I could go on and do other things.
Oh, I wish everybody thought like that. No, I mean, I think it's seek to understand first. The Stephen Covey quote. I always go into organizations. I will never, you know, think that I know what you instantly need. I'm going to seek to understand how you do things first. And then also, I want to understand what does success mean to you? Because it means something to every organization. So once I understand that, and then I know to build trust, you have to see results. So I might, based off of what your success looks like, if, maybe in the first 90 days, you do need to see how your teams are doing, that might be something I present to you. So I'm really observing first most of the time. That breaks down resistance because they don't feel like I'm coming to attack them or judge them or anything like that. I'm coming to be with you. Like we're together in this.
Mhm.
Most of the time that approach has worked out well.
And I know that there are all kinds of different personalities that you're working with, from the CEO, if there is one, the person at the top, all
Hmm.
down to the people who are actually doing the physical labor and so forth.
Yeah.
Is there an aspect to your training, to your coaching, that though you don't have the authority to give people raises or what have you, that helps them to understand that there, though it would be nice to have an increase in your hourly wage or your salary, sometimes you need to look at what you're doing and look at other ways that you are being compensated. And the reason I bring that up is because when I worked 25, 35, 40 years ago for a Christian station, I was being paid minimum wage at that time, which was, this is really low by comparison to today, $3.65 an hour. 15 years later, when I left, it was $7.35 an hour, about double.
Hmm.
But I could have gone down the road that a lot of people came to work for us with, and that is, oh, you guys don't pay me enough to do this or do that or do the other. Or a story I heard on ABC News back in the mid 80s where Motorola laid off or fired 1,000 people from one of their plants because after an internal audit, they found that $1 million worth of materials had been pilfered. They just disappeared. And the only conclusion that they could come to was that people were taking stuff because they didn't think they were getting paid enough. Were not getting the kind of compensation. Well, in my situation, I could have gone down that road,
Hmm.
but but then I was given the opportunity to do interviews. And they gave me like from 7 to 8 p.m. Monday through Friday, that if I wanted to do interviews, I could fill that time slot because it hadn't been sold and so forth. But obviously, it was subject to sale at any time.
Yeah.
So as I'm doing it, I'm thinking, okay, I may not be getting paid extra in my bank account, in my check.
Hmm.
I'm getting to do I've been given a time slot I don't have to pay for.
Hmm.
Given the interviews that I can do and put in there. I'm making the contacts. I'm getting the experience doing interviews. I'm getting the materials from the PR firm or the guest, however that works out. A myriad of different things. And I thought, if I was to convert that into cash, yeah, I'd probably be making 30, 40 bucks an hour.
It's all about motivation, right?
Yeah.
Like, I think it's when we were talking about mindset changes for the leadership team, really being able to pause and take a moment and change that forecast that they have for the budget, the staffing budget, as opposed to just looking at it as numbers, really looking at it as who are the people that you have on your teams and how are they motivated, goes a long way, because you're right. Like, not everyone is motivated by a paycheck. Some people are motivated by recognition. Some teams just are okay if you recognize them in a big town hall meeting as superstars. You know what I mean? And that costs nothing. But you have to understand and really dig in deep to who is actually on the team and what they care about.
Yeah.
So I think that's key.
You talk about, I think you mentioned, I think you used, maybe you said it or I used it, but you used the word goals. Uh,
Yeah.
or you could, I suppose another phrase would be key results uh,
Mm-hmm.
in this process. And I know that success and failure are all part of this dynamic we're going to talk about here. But is, do you find that when you go into a company and you start to do your, I will say, analysis, you're observing
Mm-hmm.
company, aside from the goal of making money, doesn't have any other goal? Whereas there are some companies that have goals for their employees and or coworkers that, look, if you want an education, I know there's some companies, big companies that do this. They
Mm-hmm.
want their employees to take courses that will further their education to where they could move on to either other departments in the company or move on to other things, that they care about the workers and their welfare beyond the paycheck.
Yeah. I think It depends. Some companies, some companies are not clear, and then some companies they're so big that you have so many different business units and silos that they might have different goals, and so they may conflict with each other, or they might, this one group has this goal and this other group has this goal, and no one's really had that conversation about if these goals align, right? So when you think about goals as far as like an individual employee, it's tricky. You have to find a balance between how the incentives are going to work for that person and then how it will work for the overall arching, you know, I have a framework of OKRs, but it's like objectives and key results. What are the stretch goals for the organization? And are these incentives that we're giving to the individuals going against or are they supporting that? Right? Because if you say, I'm going to give you, a bonus if you close out all these deals, but then I also want you to do all these trainings. But if your overarching goal has nothing to do with career advancement and trainings, which one are they going to care more about? Closing those deals or the training?
Yeah.
They're going to push that to the side, right? So it's really balancing between, understanding what the people want to work towards and are we incentivizing the right things to go with the goal of the overall company. And then also aligning everyone's vision of what the goal is. Because I've been in companies where you ask two different leaders and they'll say a completely different definition of the same goal, so it's how you interpret it as well.
Um, is there a way for employees to uh, collectively come together to work with the employer towards some of these kinds of things that we're talking about here, without having to join a union? And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with unions, don't get me wrong, but for example, I used to think back in those days in the 80s and early 90s about, well, I wonder if I could create, and this was in Arizona.
Mm-hmm.
I think I wonder if I could, maybe we could create a union and do some collective bargaining with the company and so forth. Well, Arizona's a right to work state, and basically they just get somebody else to fill the slot. They'd let us go, and and so forth.
Yeah.
Is there a better way for employees rather than going individually one by one? I don't know if numbers helps or if that's a
It
threat
does.
to the employer.
In my experience, community of practices work really well. Community of practices meaning everyone has a shared interest in something in the organization, and they get into it as volunteers, not voluntold. Someone doesn't assign them to this group, and they have ground rules, they have expectations, they have, ways that they want to be able to express the outcome of what they work towards. And the key to those community of practices is finding that like executive or that key decision maker to be your sponsor for that community of practice. So if you can get someone who is like maybe, I don't know, maybe a decision maker who's like at a vice president level or something, that you can get them to buy into supporting that group and sponsoring that group, that community of practice. I've seen that really make a lot of leeway, because if you can put it together in a way where you consistently show positive outcomes and use evidence like, hey, we have worked on this, we've seen this positive outcome, this aligns to the company organizational goals, and we feel like we should just put this across the company as a standard. And you have a sponsor who sponsors you and speaks for you in rooms that that group of people don't necessarily have access to. That's a game changer.
Yeah. It just seems to me that there are better ways to achieve what we want as employees, coworkers, business owners, et cetera, et cetera. than a lot of what's been going on over the last, I don't know, decade or maybe decades or century or more. I often think about, people here in California, for example, they complain about all the regulations. And I say, well, okay, I can agree with you today. This is my analogy of regulations in California. You're standing on a chessboard in the center. You choose which square you want to stand on in the center, black or white. And here are the rules. You can't move forward. You can't move backward. You can't move to the left. You can't move to the right. And you can't move diagonally. There's one more. And you can't stay there. Now, regulations came into play 100 or more years ago because companies didn't do the right thing. By the same token, there were no laws at the time against child labor until there were.
Mm-hmm.
So, have regulations run amok? Sure, I would say they probably have, but many of them are there for a very good reason.
Right.
It to protect the employer as well as the employee, to protect the workers in an organization as well as the organization. Um, yeah, there's got to be a better way. I don't know what it is, but it sounds to me like you've come up with something that helps the companies, the organizations, to at least start looking at and addressing some of these issues, so that they can resolve them internally rather than waiting for, let's just say, some a lawsuit. You know,
Right.
those
A
kind
bad experience, right?
of time and money and energy.
I think the true measure of like sustainable change too is how often do you get feedback from the customers? And so when I think of customers for organizations, it's your employees, really like your internal customers. How often do you get feedback from them, and how often do you implement the feedback that you get?
Mm.
That's the true measure for me. And the same thing for an external customer. Like how, with those regulations, they came into place because someone gave them feedback or something happened and they had to put it in place. Now, can we do that again? Can we do that analysis again, do that cycle again? And the more that we have that feedback loop, the closer we could kind of get to something that really matters to people right now in this day and age.
One other aspect that is fascinating to me is that of all of the, I've worked for several different radio stations from Phoenix here to Santa Barbara and other companies as well, a couple of other companies as well. And there came a point where I felt as if I were part of the company, okay? That I had a responsibility because it was, because this is the area I have to work. And I don't want to tear it up. I don't want to tear it down, and so on and so forth. Um, and that's sort of part of the territorialism, but that's not so much territorialism as, again, the being responsible for my workspace and the equipment that I work for. And I try to keep the employer informed about the conditions of the equipment that I work with. And I can only do so much. So a lot of times, if the employer isn't going to do anything, they're not going to do anything. And there are times when I have taken certain actions that initially got me into a little bit of hot water with the employer, but when they understood why I did it, and I kind of adopted, I'm sure a lot of people do, the philosophy, it's better to ask forgiveness than permission.
Yes.
Not destroying anything, but I might be violating a policy that the company has.
It's all about intentions, right?
Yeah, it's all about intentions. So that's something to take into consideration as well. We're talking with Crystal Gibson and her book, which we hope you'll get a copy of. Go to her website, theauthenticalliance.com. It's available on Amazon pre-order if you're listening to this program before the 25th of March. If it's after, it's available. Is it going to be available in Audible?
Shortly after, a month or so after the release, yes.
Wonderful, wonderful. Looking forward to that. I actually use the credits that I get through my subscription to get some of the books, such as yours and others, and listen to them. And it's really kind of nice to get a different perspective. And that's really what this program is all about. And it's really exciting to have you here to share with us your perspective as we continue here on Tell Me Your Story. I'm Richard Dugan, along with Crystal Gibson, and her book, Authentic Alliance. And Crystal, I want to thank you for sharing your story about this authentic alliance with us, along with Charmed and so forth. It's really been a pleasure,
Well,
and
thank you.
I'm glad that you are a part of the meditative crowd that takes a moment to breathe a little bit,
Yes.
not react, but to act. Big difference. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. This was fun.
Final questions that I ask all of my guests.
Yes.
I do. I want to thank you for listening to and watching Tell Me Your Story, New Paradigms for a New World, where we're giving you choices and knowledge of those choices to help make your dreams come true. We are here on Sundays at 7 a.m. and 7 p.m., Monday mornings at 1 a.m., Wednesdays at 9 a.m., and Monday through Friday from 8 to 9 a.m., streaming live at all those times, all 9 of them, at richarddugan.com. Podcasts are on SoundCloud, iTunes, TuneIn Radio, Spotify, Stitcher Player FM, Blueberry, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, and many other locations as well. And we're on YouTube where you can watch these conversations. We hope you'll subscribe and select notifications so when I post a new conversation, you'll be notified. A reminder that my book, Choices, 5 Steps for Life, is available in hardcover, paperback, and Kindle with Audible soon to come. We also ask if you'd like to be a part of the work that we are doing here and support our work financially. We would be so gratefully appreciative. We have a PayPal account. It is there for your security as well as ours. And if they ask for an email address to whom you're sending, richard@richarddugan.com. That's richard@richarddugan.com. And we also ask that you take time during this, the Decade of Perfect Vision, to take time to go within to that quiet, peaceful, calm, still place and listen to that still small voice. And with all of that being said, we now ask those 3 final questions of our very special guest. And the first one is, who is Crystal Gibson?
Crystal Gibson is a change leader, an innovator, and a human who really wants to have a higher, drives to have a high level of consciousness within the world.
What gets you up in the morning?
Curiosity.
And what was your best day?
My best day. Oh, both of my kids. I don't know. I have 2 kids, so I guess when they were born. Those are I have to have 2 days because I've got 2 kids.
Works, that works. And I thank you again so much for being a part of the work we're doing here to make
Thank you.
this for everybody. And again, we thank you. And we thank you once again for joining us here on Tell Me Your Story, New Paradigms for a New World. And until our next broadcast, podcast, videocast. Love to long. Jeanette, I am still listening. Dad, continue to be happy because I am. Smokey, I will see you on the other side. Mike, thanks for letting me be a part of your life. And to my dear friend Zorro, aho, aho.